ahead and get started. Appreciate you coming out today. My name is Sean Stone. I actually work with Elizabeth and Jay Ho to coordinate Light of Learning, very much the minor partner, but it's between the libraries and Harvey College. And we're pleased today to have Sarah Lowe and Char Booth, who are both librarians at Claremont College's library. We're going to talk about a student survey that they put together, ran, and some of the results of it.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm Sarah. I'm an assistant librarian at the library.
And I'm Char Booth. I do e-learning stuff, and I'm also the instructional kind of services manager, so I work with faculty on how to integrate the library into classes.
So as Sean said, last semester we ran a survey of all 7C students. It ran October 10th to November 10th. And it was modeled partly, there were some IT questions that were modeled partly on surveys Char has done at Ohio and in the California Community College system.
Yes, I ran a big kind of consulting job for a consortium of community colleges across California, and they ended up deploying a very similar instrument to all 110 community college systems. So really what this thing does is it looks with a broad lens at how students are owning, engaging with, using and perceiving both technology and information resources, more broadly read like library stuff, as well as what they don't really think of as library stuff, open web research, and so it kind of runs the gamut, and it's been done a couple times in other places.
And for this survey, we actually added in some more instruction-focused questions and stuff, and that's all going to come out in the final report, which we're releasing February 18th, which once it clears library administration, we should be able to give out to everybody. Today, our talk, though, is primarily focused on the logistics of doing a 7C survey and then also the IT aspects of the survey, especially given the nature of Light of Learning and what you guys are doing here. So we used Qualtrics. It deployed on all 7 campuses. There was a 78% rate of completion, and 85% discovered the survey via email. This is really important because we found out that there's actually, the library didn't have access to all the student listservs. In fact, only CGU and Pitzer got our emails initially. We had to go and contact all the individual people, and it was a lot of hurdles. Do you want to add anything?
Sure. I mean, I think it's kind of an interesting perspective that the library has in terms of doing cross-campuses research. It's not very frequently done at the student level. I think each campus tends to have their own kind of metrics that they're tracing, their own surveys that are administered, and so we're really trying to do something unique here by reaching across all the different institutional boundaries, and also, of course, going through all the separate institutional review boards, which is very interesting to need to do that for each campus. Gave us a lot of insight into how that type of coordination can work.
But we do have all that information now, so consider us a resource if anybody ever wants to do a 7C survey. That we know all about where to go and what listservs to put it in, so we're totally down with that. Okay, we had a response rate of 15% of students. You can see the breakdown here. CGU and CMC were the 2 biggest. Let's see what else. And the response rate by college, though, when you break it down by how many students actually, the highest response rate was KGI. But maybe that's, they only have 120 students, so it didn't really take a lot for them to get up to 35%. And then you can see also the percentage of, so that's the percentage of the number of students who responded versus the total student population. So that gives you an idea of how much we got, so that you see the KGI is kind of an outlier. Anything you want to add?
I don't think so.
Okay. Student status was actually really quite equal, an equal breakdown between, all of the first year to senior and then MA and PhD.
So from that, I mean, we were not able to do a random sample, and we do not have a completely proportional response from all campuses, but given the disciplinary breakdown that we had, which was, pretty, it kind of matched the disciplinary makeup of the colleges as well as this spread. We feel like we're getting a pretty representative sample of the campuses.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so like I mentioned before, what the survey does is try to look at 4 main things. How students engage with the library as an institution, as a building, and also with information resources, whether contained within the library or not. their engagement with academic technologies we're mostly looking at, but that's including how they use their smartphone, how they use, a couple of different things that could be useful in an academic setting, but also could be engaged in more of a personal setting. And then also, how do those two things, their engagement with the library and their engagement with potential applications of library technology that are maybe unconventional, such as social media, how those things might dovetail, and what kind of insight we can get into how students want us to reach them through different types of personal networks. And then finally, the entire kind of skill and concept area of information literacy, how students find, engage with, evaluate, and apply different types of information, media, and formats in their learning experience. So we're trying to get all four of those things, rather ambitious as they along the survey, but we've got a lot of data. So one of the things that I wanted to mention, and this is interesting when looked at comparatively with the two last large-scale student technology perception surveys I did in 2008 at Ohio University, and then last year, 2011, at the community colleges. This question is basically designed to, on a bell curve, ask students how technologically receptive they are to kind of new and developing things. So our student body skews pretty heavily towards more technologically receptive than less. The two categories on the top are, I don't love technology, get it out of my face, and the ones on the bottom are, actually, I tend to adopt and try things much more frequently than my peers. So what we're seeing here is definitely different than what I experienced in the community college survey and the Ohio University survey, which was a lot of first-generation college students, kind of like rural Appalachian context. And here, they skew very heavily towards technological kind of like receptivity in general, very positive impressions of learning tech. So that's something that stood out to me very strongly among this population.
And when you break it down by college, Harvey Mudd, not surprisingly, also is one of the ones who skews the higher. Some of the other colleges, not so much.
And when you look at this in a disciplinary breakdown, which is a little bit too much information for today, of course, you would assume people in the humanities tend to skew towards the less technologically receptive, just because of the nature of the type of research that they tend to do. I mean, that's kind of a broad characterization, but it is interesting to see it confirmed along those breakdowns by college. This slide shows some basic breakdowns of what students own in terms of academic tech. And this is not up to just 100%. They were checking all that applies. So obviously, laptop computers are actually owned by literally 98% of our respondents, which is even much higher than the response rates I got at the other two colleges. I mean, that was about 90, 92, 93%. In the community colleges, obviously, there's a lot less of the economic privilege at work there to buy into these sorts of things. Mobile phone, smartphone penetration is at 71% of the respondent population. Printers still owned by 43% of people, and a full 27% of our population still owns a non-web enabled phone, which I thought was interesting. 20% of students already own an ebook reader. This is aligned with national averages, as kind of surveyed by the Pew Internet and American Life Project in 2012. Same with tablet computers and netbooks, about equivalent to the national averages, 20% and 7% respectively. And then desktop computers have declined to under 20% of ownership, and that's also common. All right, so I've been this is a lot of information, so bear with me a little bit. And what I would like to point out to you is the very light blue bar on the far right. That is my smartphone, and I do this very frequently. The most frequently kind of like engaged in application of smartphones among all of our student respondents was to text message, also to find information, so to look up facts, to look up information on basically anything of consequence. Not far behind that would be using search engines. So we're looking at well over 40% of students saying they do this frequently. So that would be kind of translated to a daily basis or more than daily. Things that are not used very frequently, so in the far right you have either the three categories of non-use, my device can't do this, I don't know what you're talking about, and never. So that's what those three bars represent. So location-based services, while they've made leaps and bounds from previous surveys I've done, are still only very rarely used by, from frequently to very rarely used by about 40% of our population. It doesn't interest me is a huge range those users. So that would be one of the most emerging mobile kind of like applications that are out there, things like Foursquare. So location-based services, highly hyped, but perhaps not as highly adopted yet by our user population. Very frequent status updating in different types of social media sites. And one of the things that we're always looking for is, are the students using these things for research? And we found that over 20%, about 25% of our respondent population is already reading ebooks at least occasionally on their mobile device, and also doing research for an assignment. 29% are doing that at least occasionally, which is a lot more than I expected. So a tiny mobile device, actually doing academic research. And this is something I do personally, you know, so I kind of sympathize, but it really is rather staggering, and it signals to the library that we need to make sure that our resources are actually compatible with tiny screens. Everything from ebooks to electronic journal articles. It's kind of a difficult thing to pull off because we don't have all the control over it in the world, but we can pressure our vendors to try to get it by. All right, so
You're saying mobile, you're just using smartphones.
Web-enabled
Because you're calling
smartphones.
iPads a tablet.
yeah, that's a tablet. So
Okay.
that last screen is literally just web-enabled
Yeah.
phones
Okay.
like Androids, and yeah. So it's kind of, if you look closely at the data, you're like, wow, like they're really, I mean, they're doing a lot of high-level kind of tiny text things on these baby screens.
It's crazy.
Right. So we went one level deeper. Oh, is this you?
Yeah.
Okay, right.
No, okay. But then, yeah, so then we asked about the library preferences, again, on your tiny little phone. So if your phone could do this, would you want to do this? And you can see it's set up so the most likely at the top. So they'd be most likely to get notices, check their account, find hours, do call numbers, use the mobile sites of databases. We do need to do more work at the library, I think, in making sure that we provide access to that right now. The library has a mobile site, right, Candace, but we don't use it, or it's still under development?
I think it's still under development.
Okay.
That was changed. I mean, we have the catalog, the library catalog
Right.
we have as a
But,
website,
yeah,
but
not
the
the
website,
Right, which is something we really do need to think about, especially after the results of the survey.
Right.
And then the things they do less frequently, though, accessing online reserves, reading ebooks, and this isn't tech at all, this is our problem at the library. Using the research guides, asking us for help, and asking us for via chat or text message, so they're not doing that as much as they are the things that involve people, they're not doing as much as the things that just involve themselves.
And it should be said that that's actually consistent with national findings, other things I've done, and it's also slightly higher here than it has been at previous institutions. And that may be the liberal arts context. People may seek individual kind of assistance in research realms more here than they would at institutions that have fewer resources. We're seeing that the hard numbers of people who engage with librarians for research assistance be a little bit lower than, say, at the community college, but the receptiveness to, I would do that is probably kind of conditioned by the nature of the education that they're receiving here.
So then we asked them how they actually access course readings, and overwhelmingly they go to Sakai or on the web. They still buy a ton of textbooks, and you thought this was really interesting because
Well,
thing was interesting.
I'm still really surprised by how many printed textbooks are being purchased at this institution relative to others.